In the quiet darkness of night, when the noise of the world fades into a distant hum and the soft rhythm of your breathing becomes the only sound you truly hear, allow your mind to drift backward through time, not by centuries, but by tens of thousands of years, toward a place where the foundations of human civilization were laid stone by ancient stone, word by fragile word, belief by mysterious belief. Tonight, as you close your eyes and surrender gently to sleep, we journey to the fertile plains that once lay between two great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, a place the ancients called the cradle of life, the world later named Mesopotamia. It was here, under sprawling skies and endless horizons of desert wind, that humanity took its first organized steps toward becoming something greater than wandering tribes, something more complex than scattered families of hunters and gatherers. Under the warm glow of the earliest hearths, the simple seeds of community became the towering structures of society, and from the mud-brick cities of Sumer to the glittering courts of Babylon, a story unfolded that would echo through time, shaping the laws we obey, the stories we tell, the gods we fear, and the dreams we pursue. Imagine the world of these first innovators. There are no empires yet, no kingdoms stretching across maps, no written borders dividing one nation from another. Instead there are rivers, vast, unpredictable rivers spilling life into the land around them. Each year, silt carried from distant mountains spreads across the flat plains, creating soil rich enough to grow more food than a single family could ever consume. It is this abundance that changes everything. For the first time in human existence, survival is not a daily fight. Food can be stored, traded, shared. From storage comes management. From management comes hierarchy. And from hierarchy, slowly and inevitably, comes civilization. You can almost feel the delicate balance forming, each grain of barley marking the beginning of agriculture, each mud brick wall rising as the outline of a city, each canal reflecting starlight while extending the promise of water farther and farther from its source. The earliest cities, names like Uruk and Eridu, emerge like dreams made of clay. Their people discover a truth so powerful it will redefine humanity, that together, humans can build something larger than life, something that will outlast them, drift deeper. Picture the fires of the first temples burning through the night, their warmth drawing small communities close. Shamanic whispers become the formal words of priests. Ancestor tales evolve into myths of cosmic creation. In the darkness of early history, the Sumerians search for meaning in the sky and find gods in the patterns of stars. Every thunderstorm is the anger of a divine force, every harvest a sacred gift from a celestial protector. They carve these beliefs into stone, shaping the earliest symbols of written language, cuneiform. This is not simply writing, it is the crystallization of memory. For the first time, knowledge no longer dies with the storyteller. It remains, carved into tablets, silent yet eternal. Through this, the people of Mesopotamia achieve immortality, not by living forever, but by being remembered. As you float through this ancient landscape, let your imagination rest beside the flowing waters of the Euphrates. Feel the cool wind carrying the scent of wet earth. Close your eyes and listen to the silent perseverance of those who once walked barefoot across fertile soil, tending crops that would feed a growing city. Every seed planted was an act of faith, not only in the land, but in the future. Somewhere in this moment, a child learns to shape clay into a tablet, their small hands pressing wedges into soft mud, forming numbers to count sheep, symbols to record harvests. They cannot know that the marks they make are the doorway to history itself, that future generations will study these signs to understand where humanity began. Yet, the child writes, because those who came before discovered that knowledge could be stored, that the past could speak to the future, the night around you deepens as we travel onward. Mesopotamia grows. Cities rise like constellations of brick and mortar across the plains. Trade routes stretch across deserts. Caravans carry obsidian, lapis lazuli, copper, and textiles from distant lands, each item telling a story of human connection. In bustling markets, strangers speak different languages yet understand each other through weight, measure, and the universal need for sustenance. Through these exchanges, cultures blend, ideas collide, and innovation ignites. The concept of ownership emerges, followed by laws to protect it. Kings appear, not merely as warriors but as symbols of cosmic order, believed to be chosen by gods to maintain balance between chaos and harmony. Let the sound of history lull you deeper. With the establishment of kingship comes the idea of recorded law. Centuries later, Hammurabi will inscribe his code onto a stone stele, an ancient promise of justice and consequence. But even now, long before Hammurabi's reign, the seeds of legal thought have been planted. Agreements are made, conflicts are resolved, and debts are carved into clay for all to see. This transparency shapes society. It teaches accountability. It introduces the idea of fairness, not perfect, not universal, but groundbreaking for its time. Each decision made in those early cities ripples outward across countless generations, influencing systems of governance we still live under today. You are drifting now, comfortably. Let the rhythm slow. Consider the spiritual world of the Mesopotamians, a realm populated by gods of water, storms, love, and war. Inanna, Ishtar, Enlil, Anu, Ea, each deity reflecting the elemental forces that shape their daily lives. These gods are not distant, abstract concepts. They are present in every harvest, every birth, every riverbank. To appease them, humans build towering ziggurats, stepped pyramids climbing toward the heavens, their foundations reaching deep into Earth's sacred soil. These structures are not simply temples, they are expressions of aspiration, proof that humans can touch the sky through unity of belief. As priests offer sacrifices and prayers beneath stars so bright they seem nearly within reach, they reinforce a fundamental human desire, the wish to belong to something greater than oneself. With each breath, the land around you becomes clearer, more vivid, yet calmer, softer. The flicker of torchlight dances across clay walls painted with symbols of gods. The air swirls with incense and the murmur of ancient chants. If you listen closely, you might hear a distant melody carried by wind, a hymn sung thousands of years ago, preserved only in fragments of stone tablets and scholarly reconstructions. It is the song of a civilization awakening. It tells of floods and kings, victories and losses, love and despair. These are the earliest stories, but they share a familiar rhythm, the same patterns you hear in the tales of today. Human emotion, it seems, has never changed. It is as ancient as the rivers that gave birth to our world. Now let your thoughts settle into this truth. We are all descendants of these early dreamers. The Mesopotamians did not know that their innovations would shape the entire trajectory of human development. They simply solved the problems before them. How do we feed many? How do we store knowledge? How do we govern peace? How do we record time? How do we understand death? Yet, by answering these questions through necessity, they created the building blocks of civilization. Writing, agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, law, concepts we take for granted today, originated in the dust of Mesopotamian plains. Their achievements are so deeply woven into modern life that we rarely notice their ancient origins. Every book you've read, every calendar you've checked, every contract signed, every map drawn, echoes decisions made thousands of years ago by people whose names we may never know. As you approach sleep, imagine the sun rising over the ziggurats of Ur, casting long golden shadows across crowded streets where merchants prepare their wares. Visualize fishermen pulling nets from calm waters. Hear children laughing among clay tablets. Feel the steady pulse of a civilization determined to grow. For this is not just history. It is the story of us, all of us, told through the whispered breaths of time. When you wake tomorrow, the world around you will feel familiar. But tonight, as dreams take hold, you walk among the stars of our earliest ancestors, beneath a sky older than memory, beside the rivers that shaped destiny. Welcome to ancient Mesopotamia, the first great chapter in humanity's epic journey. Our story moves slowly, like the gentle curve of the rivers themselves, from the earliest whispers of human settlement into the organized heartbeat of civilization. To understand the beginning of this movement, we trace our steps back to the moment when scattered families first gathered around shared fires, discovering that the land between the Tigris and Euphrates could offer more than survival, it could offer a future. The Fertile Crescent, stretching like a curved smile across the face of early Earth, invited humans to stay, to plant seeds, to watch them sprout, and to build lives rooted in one place. To settle was to choose hope over wandering, the future over the unknown. Yet this decision was not simple, nor was it immediate. It was the result of centuries of observation, trial, and quiet revolution. Imagine small groups of humans migrating from the Zagros Mountains, following wild herds and seasonal rains. Their lives were guided by instinct and necessity. Fire was their guardian, stone tools their memory, and the stars above their only map. But in the lowlands, near the rivers, something unique awaited them. They discovered plants that could be domesticated: barley, wheat, lentils, grains that did not vanish in winter, but returned each year to the places where they had been sown. They learned that animals could be tamed. Sheep and goats that once fled at the sight of a hunter now lived peacefully beside huts built of reeds and clay. This was the first movement, the shift from hunter-gatherer life to agricultural settlement. The change was gradual, perhaps unnoticed by those living it, but through this subtle evolution, humanity stepped into a new relationship with the earth. The rivers played a silent but decisive role. Every spring, when the snows melted in distant mountains, the Tigris and Euphrates swelled with water, breaking their banks and flooding the plains. For those accustomed to wandering, floods were a threat. But for those who dared to stay, floods were a gift. The waters retreated, leaving behind rich, dark soil that could feed communities far larger than hunter groups. The people learned to predict patterns, to store food, to create surplus. Surplus meant possibility. It meant that some individuals no longer needed to spend every waking hour searching for meals. They could instead weave cloth, carve tools, teach children, study the stars, or plan structures that rose beyond simple necessity. With surplus came specialization, the beginning of professions and roles, and with it, the earliest forms of social organization. Let your mind drift into this world. Villages rise, made of sun-dried bricks stacked in careful rows. Roofs are flat, used for drying grains beneath the hot Mesopotamian sun. Around each village lie fields of ripening crops, and beyond them herds of animals grazing under the watchful eyes of shepherds. Trade begins as a whisper, the exchange of one resource for another. A family with more grain might trade with those who have crafted tools. Herdsmen might offer wool to those who can weave it into cloth. Slowly, networks form, small at first, contained within walking distance, but destined to spread across the known world. Through these exchanges, people share more than goods. They share stories, techniques, myths, and knowledge that could not be contained within a single village. The movement deepens. As settlements grow, they require coordination. Someone must decide when to plant and when to harvest, where to dig canals and how to divide water. The river's unpredictable nature forces humans to adapt, not individually, but collectively. The first irrigation systems emerge, narrow channels carved into the earth, guiding water from riverbanks to fields far beyond natural flood zones. With each successful harvest, populations expand. Families grow, villages merge, and before long, the first cities appear like rising constellations across the Mesopotamian plain. The people now call their land by names: Sumer, Akkad, later Babylon, each name symbolizing a new phase in humanity's path. The movement we speak of is not a rebellion or a sudden uprising. It is the steady, deliberate transformation of human existence, shaped quietly by necessity and ambition. People begin to wonder not only how to survive, but how to thrive. They move from simply living in the world to reshaping it. Slowly, power structures form, not through dominance alone but through social need. Elders, once respected for their knowledge of survival, now guide entire communities with wisdom built on experience. The most skilled builders lead construction of communal granaries. The most knowledgeable farmers advise on irrigation. What began as simple leadership eventually becomes political authority. The seeds of kingship are planted not through force, but through collective trust. Consider the inner lives of these early citizens. Their understanding of the universe is intimately connected to nature. The rivers rising and falling, the cycles of the moon, the movement of stars, all are interpreted as expressions of divine intent. Spiritual thought becomes the backbone of the movement, providing answers where logic cannot. Temples emerge at the centers of cities, elevated slightly above the rest of the settlement, symbolizing the sacred connection between earth and the heavens. Shamans evolve into priests, keepers of rituals and interpreters of God's will. Offerings are given not only in fear, but in gratitude, acknowledging the fragile balance between human effort and the unpredictable forces of nature. Sleep comes easier as you feel the rhythm of this ancient world. Behind every innovation lies a simple truth: humans discovered that unity could overcome the limitations of the individual. Where one person could not move a stone, 10 could build a wall. Where one mind could not predict the river, a community could watch, measure, and remember. Memory itself becomes a tool. The first written symbols emerge, not inspired by poetry or dreams, but by accounting. Who owes grain? How much barley was harvested? How many animals were traded? The clay tablet becomes an instrument of order, a way to remember agreements and organize society. What begins as numbers evolves into words, stories, prayers, and history. The movement also brings conflict. As settlements grow, resources become more valuable. Water rights spark disagreements, territorial boundaries are questioned. Yet even these tensions drive development. People create systems of arbitration. They recognize that conflict can destroy what they worked so hard to build. Through necessity, the earliest forms of law are born, not yet carved into stone, but spoken, remembered, and expected to be honored. These laws become the skeleton on which society rests, the framework that makes large communities stable. Without them, progress would collapse under the weight of ambition. Listen closely, as if hearing the heartbeat of the ancient plains. Every step forward is a response to a challenge. Every innovation, from irrigation to architecture, is the product of struggle. The people who lived here did not know they were creating history. They were simply living, adapting, dreaming, and through their dreams, our future took shape. The movement from survival to civilization is not a straight line. It is a tapestry woven from countless small decisions, failures, and triumphs. Each thread is a life, a family, a community, a city. Over time, these threads create a pattern so vast that we are still deciphering it today. And so, the movement begins, not as a revolution of weapons, but as a revolution of ideas. Humans learn that they can not only respond to nature but influence it. They can channel rivers, measure land, count time, and record memory. This realization transforms everything. It takes humanity out of the wilderness and places them at the center of their own story. No longer passengers on the river of time, they become its navigators. The plains of Mesopotamia become the canvas on which humanity paints its first masterpiece. As your eyes grow heavy and your thoughts drift like boats on the Euphrates, remember that this moment, the beginning, is the foundation of all that follows. The movement from scattered tribes to complex cities is the first great turning of the human wheel. It is the quiet genesis of government, agriculture, religion, science, and law. It is the point where we stop merely surviving and begin shaping destiny. As civilization rises in the warm cradle between the rivers, the story of Mesopotamia becomes the story of its people, visionaries and rulers, priests and scribes, architects of destiny whose names drift toward us through the dust of ages. Though millennia have passed, their echoes remain carved into tablets of clay, etched into legends of kings and gods, preserved by the hunger of human memory. To understand the great movement from simple villages to towering cities, we must step into the lives of those who shaped the world, leaders who guided communities through uncertainty, who turned conflict into progress, who faced the chaos of nature and the ambitions of men with courage that changed history. The first of these figures lived not in grand palaces, but in simple structures built of reeds and mud. They were elders who earned respect through wisdom, guardians of tradition who knew the rhythms of the river and the secrets of planting. Without armies, they led through knowledge. Their leadership was quiet, woven into daily life like strands of wool forming a blanket. Among these early figures were shamans who interpreted dreams, healers who understood herbs, and negotiators who resolved disputes over land and water. While their names are forgotten, their legacy remains, the unseen architects of cooperation. They laid the foundation of organized society long before the first king claimed divine authority, but as settlements grew into cities, leadership evolved. Authority shifted from collective councils to centralized power. The birth of kingship marked a turning point, a belief that a single figure could maintain balance between order and chaos, between humans and the gods. One of the earliest known kings is Enmebaragesi of Kish, a ruler who appears in both archaeology and legend. His reign, sometime around 2600 BCE, is a testament to the moment when myth and history become entwined. He is described as a conqueror who subdued neighboring cities, building influence through military strength. His name survives not only on tablets, but in the great Sumerian epic that would later shape Mesopotamian culture, a story about friendship, mortality, and kingship. The Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh himself, whether wholly historical or partly legendary, represents the ideal Mesopotamian ruler, powerful yet flawed, divine in ancestry yet deeply human in emotion. His epic is more than a story, it is a reflection of Mesopotamian values. It tells of a king who begins as a tyrant, learns compassion through the friendship of the wild man Enkidu, and seeks immortality after facing the certainty of death. In this journey, Gilgamesh mirrors the early struggle of civilization itself, the transformation from brute force to enlightened leadership. His tale teaches that greatness is not found in conquest alone, but in wisdom, responsibility, and the acceptance of human limits. Even as the city of Uruk thrived under walls said to be built by Gilgamesh, his story became a lesson for rulers through the centuries. Alongside kings stood another group of key figures, scribes. While kings commanded armies, scribes commanded knowledge. They were the keepers of language, masters of cuneiform, the first humans to transform speech into symbols that could endure beyond a single lifetime. Their roles were central, recording harvests, tracking trade, preserving laws, and writing stories that would shape culture. The earliest known author in human history appears in Mesopotamia, in Enheduanna, the daughter of Sargon of Akkad. As high priestess of the moon god Nana, she composed hymns that blend personal emotion with sacred devotion. Her voice survives on clay tablets, making her the first known woman to sign her name to a literary work. Through her writing, we glimpse the inner world of ancient spirituality, a world where gods were not distant, but near, guiding the fates of both kings and common people. Between rulers and scribes stood the priests, individuals whose authority came not from armies or literacy, but from belief. They interpreted signs in the stars, sacrifices on altars, dreams whispered in the night. To the Mesopotamians, the cosmos was alive with meaning. A storm could signal the anger of Enlil, a lunar eclipse might foretell disaster. Priests were the mediators between humans and the divine, shaping decisions that affected entire cities. They oversaw temples like the Grand Ziggurat of Ur, a towering mountain of bricks reaching toward the heavens, a monument to humanity's desire for connection with the gods. Temples were not only places of worship, they were centers of administration, holding lands, storing grain, and employing laborers. Religion and governance were inseparable, yet even with kings, scribes, and priests offering structure, the early cities of Mesopotamia faced constant struggle. These struggles were not merely against nature, but against each other. Surplus created wealth. Wealth created ambition. Ambition created conflict. City-states like Ur, Lagash, and Umma competed for control of fertile fields and water routes. Irrigation canals became lines of division. Who controlled the water controlled life itself. One of the earliest recorded wars in history was fought between Lagash and Umma over disputed borders. The conflict was brutal, but what survives is more profound, a tablet recording the peace treaty. This is the first known treaty in human history, a sign that even in conflict, the idea of fairness and agreement was valued. War shaped leaders like Eannatum of Lagash, who united neighboring cities through conquest, creating what some historians consider the world's first empire. His inscriptions describe victories blessed by the gods, and walls filled with symbols of divine protection. Victory was not merely political, it was spiritual. For the Mesopotamians, success in battle proved that the gods favored their cause. Defeat meant divine displeasure. This belief fueled endless cycles of ambition, alliance, and rebellion. Cities rose, flourished, and fell into ruins, only to be rebuilt by new rulers who believed they were chosen by heavens. Among these rulers, one figure stands above many, Sargon of Akkad. Born, according to legend, as a child set adrift on a river in a basket of reeds, Sargon rose from humble origins to reshape Mesopotamia. Around 2334 BCE, he conquered Sumerian cities and united them into the Akkadian Empire, the first true empire in recorded history. His achievement was not simply military, it was administrative and cultural. Sargon appointed governors to rule distant lands, standardized weights and measures, and encouraged the spread of his language, Akkadian. His reign turned local culture into a shared civilization. Trade routes expanded. Ideas traveled. Inscriptions proclaim him king of the four corners of the earth, a title reflecting the ambition of a leader who believed his rule was universal, but great leadership always walked hand in hand with great struggle. After Sargon's death, his empire faced rebellion, drought, and invasion. The Akkadian records speak of famines so severe that mothers could not feed their children, of storms of dust that darkened the sky for years. Modern scholars connect this crisis to climate change, the 4.2 kiloyear event, a severe drought that affected civilizations across the ancient world. Nature, unpredictable and indifferent, humbled even the most powerful kings. Many cities were abandoned. Populations migrated. The empire weakened. The lesson was clear: humans could command armies and carve laws into stone, but they could not control the elements that sustained life. As you drift deeper into this ancient story, listen to the quiet heartbeat of history. Every achievement carried within it a challenge. Every step forward required resilience. The people of Mesopotamia learned that struggle was a teacher. Through drought, they improved irrigation systems. Through war, they developed diplomacy and treaties. Through the collapse of empires, they learned the importance of administration and law. What we call progress was, for them, survival. Let your mind rest on the image of a lone scribe pressing symbols into a damp clay tablet by flickering lamplight. Outside, a city murmurs with the sounds of markets and distant chants from temples. Soldiers sharpen copper blades for battles that will soon be forgotten. Children chase each other around unfinished walls of new buildings. Above them all, the stars turn slowly, as they have for thousands of years, indifferent to the goals and fears of those below. These are the key figures in early struggles, not only kings whose names still echo across time, but the countless unnamed souls whose hands shaped the bricks, carved the tablets, planted the seeds, and whispered prayers to the heavens. Their combined effort formed the movement that would define humanity's future. Through their victories and failures, through their ambition and humility, Mesopotamia became the first great experiment in civilization. Every civilization has a moment when its identity crystallizes, when the foundations laid by generations of unseen hands transform into a vision of greatness. For Mesopotamia, this turning point came not from a single battle or a solitary ruler, but from the convergence of ideas, innovations, and ambitions that united the many into one. It was the moment when scattered city-states, once isolated by distance and distrust, became part of a shared destiny. In this era, the rhythms of the rivers, the wisdom of the scribes, the ambitions of kings, and the prayers of priests aligned like stars to reveal a new horizon. The concept of empire meant more than conquest. It introduced systems of administration, shared cultures, unified languages, and collective identity. The turning point began with Sargon of Akkad, the leader who reshaped politics in the ancient world. His rise, like a legend sung around fires, marked the beginning of something humanity had never seen before, the notion that one ruler could command lands beyond the reach of his voice, governed not by tradition alone, but by structure and order. Under Sargon, the Akkadian Empire extended across hundreds of miles, linking Sumerian cities through a network of governors, roads, and laws. For the first time, the idea of Mesopotamia stretched beyond local identity to a regional consciousness. Imagine the world as it was then. From the walls of Akkad, messengers on horseback carried sealed tablets to distant cities, Ur, Kish, Lagash, Umma, each tablet inscribed with orders from the throne, instructions about harvest quotas, troop movements, trade regulations, legal disputes. These tablets, once mere symbols on clay, became instruments of centralized power. Sargon's genius lay not only in his victories but in his ability to maintain control through communication. Information, more than raw strength, became the lifeblood of empire. Administrators tracked grain, soldiers guarded trade routes, and scribes recorded every detail of governance. In a land once defined by independence, unity took hold, but empires are delicate. They require balance between control and cooperation, between fear and loyalty. Sargon's empire faced resistance from proud city-states accustomed to autonomy. Revolts sparked like embers scattered by wind. Yet the turning point endured because it was deeper than the rule of one man. It represented a philosophical shift, a belief that shared identity could transcend local walls. Even after Sargon's death, the idea of empire remained rooted in the soil of Mesopotamia, waiting to be reborn in new forms. As you drift through this era, picture the innovations that gave shape to this transformation. In workshops where clay was shaped, craftspeople developed standardized measurements for trade. In observatories where priests watched stars trace arcs across the sky, astronomers charted celestial patterns with precision, linking cosmic movements to agricultural cycles. Calendars were born from careful observation, allowing leaders to plan harvests, rituals, and taxation with unprecedented accuracy. What had once been instinct became science, what had once been myth became calculation. This growing mastery over nature gave people a sense of control, a belief that their civilization could defy the unpredictability of rivers and skies. The turning point also emerged from a revolution in writing. Cuneiform, once used primarily for recording inventories, evolved into a complex script capable of capturing law, history, literature, and poetry. Tablets preserved not only numbers but narratives and decrees. The wisdom of one generation could be handed to the next without distortion. Knowledge became cumulative. The stories written in this period, tales of heroes, hymns to gods, instructions on farming, offered more than entertainment. They created a shared cultural memory that unified people across cities. When citizens in distant regions read stories of Gilgamesh, they were reminded that despite their differences, they belonged to the same cultural universe. But the turning point of a civilization is never without struggle. For every innovation, there is a shadow. As the Akkadian Empire expanded, so too did the demands placed on its people. Taxes increased. Labor was conscripted. Soldiers marched farther from home. For many, the price of unity was sacrifice. These pressures sowed seeds of resentment that would soon challenge the empire's foundation. Yet even this resistance played a role in shaping the legacy of Mesopotamia. For the challenges faced by the Akkadians taught future rulers how to balance ambition with governance, imposition with compromise. The true turning point, however, was not the rise of a single empire, it was the emergence of law as the guiding force of society. After the Akkadian collapse, when drought and invasions shattered the empire's structure, new leaders learned from past successes and failures. Among them, the most influential was Hammurabi of Babylon, a king who understood that lasting power came not from the sword alone, but from the written word. His code, carved into black stone, stands as one of the most important achievements in human history, a comprehensive set of laws governing trade, marriage, wages, crime, and punishment. It was not the first code, but it was the most complete, the most enduring, and the most symbolic of a civilization that understood the power of fairness. When Hammurabi carved his laws into stone, he declared that justice was not arbitrary. The wealthy and the poor, the powerful and the weak, were subject to the same principles. Although the punishments were harsh by modern standards, the idea behind them was revolutionary. Society should be predictable, not chaotic. The consequences of actions should be known, not hidden. The ruler's authority should be bound by reason, not whim. This was the turning point that transformed Mesopotamia from a collection of cities defined by conflict into a civilization defined by order. The code did not erase inequality, but it offered stability, a promise that disputes could be resolved through law, not violence. As you lie in the quiet of night, imagine a scribe standing before Hammurabi's stone stele, running his fingers across the carved symbols. He knows that the laws he reads will influence generations. He knows that future kings will look to this stone for guidance. In that moment, the movement from survival to civilization reaches a new phase. Human behavior becomes systematized. Morality becomes a civic duty. What began with counting grain harvests now shapes the ethics of an entire culture. The turning point also affected how Mesopotamians saw themselves. They were no longer isolated groups clinging to riverbanks, they were part of a sophisticated world with diplomacy, economics, art, and philosophy. Trade extended beyond the borders of Mesopotamia, reaching Anatolia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and the Levant. Caravan routes connected distant civilizations, spreading goods and ideas like invisible threads sewn into the fabric of humanity. The movement of goods became the movement of culture. Shared knowledge enriched both sides of every exchange. A piece of obsidian from Anatolia might carry with it new metallurgy techniques, a strand of lapis lazuli from Afghanistan might inspire new forms of jewelry and symbolism. The turning point, then, was not a moment, it was a process. It was a series of realizations that reshaped human identity. The rise of empires, the creation of law, the expansion of trade, the evolution of writing, the sophistication of astronomy, all combined to form a civilization that understood itself not as a cluster of cities, but as a collective project, the building of humanity's first great societal experiment. The Mesopotamians transformed the wild and unpredictable world into one governed by systems, structure, and ideals. As sleep washes over your thoughts, Consider how distant these people were, yet how familiar their journey feels. They struggled for food and water, fought over land, built alliances, recorded memories, sought immortality through stories. They loved, feared, dreamed, and questioned. The turning point of Mesopotamia is the turning point of all human civilization, the moment we realized that society could be organized, that life could be improved through shared knowledge, that the world could be shaped by human will rather than fate alone. In that realization lies the birth of everything that came after: cities filled with lights, nations ruled by law, stories written on paper, ideas shared across oceans. Tonight, as you drift further into sleep, remember that the turning point was not created by kings alone. It emerged from the hands and minds of countless people whose names are lost to time. Farmers who learned to tame rivers. Scribes who shaped symbols. Priests who watched the stars. Merchants who braved deserts. Builders who stacked bricks until the sky seemed within reach. Together, they created something new, the first great awakening of civilization. The story of Mesopotamia, like the rivers that nourished it, reaches its greatest width before it begins to divide and branch into unexpected channels. The peak of this ancient civilization is not a single moment of triumph, but a long and radiant period in which cities flourished, knowledge deepened, and culture matured into forms that would echo across the world for thousands of years. After Hammurabi's code solidified the power of law, Babylon rose as the beating heart of Mesopotamia. Its walls, said to be wide enough for chariots to race upon, enclosed temples, palaces, gardens, and markets where the wealth of the known world could be touched by hand. Travelers from distant lands spoke in awe of Babylon's scale, its colorful bricks, its towering ziggurats that climbed toward the sun. This was not merely a city, it was a statement. Humans had learned to conquer scarcity, to organize abundance, to turn raw resources into beauty. Under the Babylonian kings, arts and sciences bloomed. Mathematics evolved beyond counting grain and livestock. Scribes learned to solve equations, create tables of multiplication, divide and measure land with precision. Astronomers charted the movements of planets and stars, predicting lunar eclipses, identifying constellations, developing calendars that synchronized agriculture with the heavens. Their insight into the cosmos shaped religion and science alike. In clay tablets buried beneath centuries of soil, we find calculations so advanced that they form the foundation of geometry and algebra. The people who walked these streets may not have known that their discoveries would shape faraway civilizations, but their curiosity was a force capable of crossing time itself. The walls of Babylon contained a society stratified but vibrant, each layer of life bound to the others by commerce, ritual, and law. Farmers irrigated fields beyond the city, delivering grain to the temples. Priests used grain to support workers, pay builders, and feed the city's poor. Merchants traded goods in bustling squares: copper tools, woven garments, spices, livestock, pottery painted with symbols of gods and seasons. In workshops, artisans crafted jewelry from gold and lapis lazuli imported from faraway lands. Music drifted through narrow streets: harps, drums, and reed flutes playing melodies passed down from unknown ancestors. Storytellers recited epics by firelight, shaping memory into poetry. The peak of Mesopotamia was built upon cooperation, trade, and knowledge. But at its edges, the world was changing. New civilizations were rising, drawn by the same forces that gave life to the Fertile Crescent. To the west, Egypt's kingdoms flourished along the Nile. To the east, the Indus Valley echoed with commerce. To the north, Anatolian tribes discovered the secrets of iron. Around Mesopotamia, the horizon darkened with possibility and threat. Exchange brought new wealth, but also new rivals. The vibrant heart of Babylon beat within a world that was growing larger and more daring, and within this growing world came challenges, both natural and human. Nature, which had once been the silent partner of civilization, revealed itself as unpredictable and even cruel. The rivers that fed the fields sometimes swelled beyond expectation, destroying crops with violent floods. Other times, the skies withheld rain, and drought turned fertile soil into dust. Salinization, the slow poisoning of farmland by accumulated minerals, began to erode productivity. Farmers dug deeper canals, built higher walls, and prayed louder beneath temple roofs. But the land was changing, reminding humans that their mastery over nature was never complete. Population growth added pressure. Cities grew faster than the resources that sustained them. Crowded streets amplified disease, conflict, and inequality. The promise of prosperity faltered for many, creating tension between the wealthy elite and the laborers whose hands built the foundations of power. The ideal of shared justice, carved into Hammurabi's stone, struggled against the ambitions of rulers seeking glory. Kings expanded armies, levied taxes, demanded loyalty. The peaceful flow of knowledge through trade sometimes became the march of soldiers through conquered lands. The greatest challenge, however, came from beyond Mesopotamia. Forces of migration and conquest swept into the region. The Kassites, a mountain people from the Zagros, entered Babylon and eventually ruled it for centuries. Unlike earlier conquerors who destroyed what they claimed, the Kassites absorbed Mesopotamian culture, preserving its languages, temples, and institutions. Yet their rule marked a shift, from Mesopotamia leading the world to Mesopotamia adapting to the world. New powers rose. None were more formidable than the Assyrians, whose capital at Nineveh stood like a fortress of ambition on the northern plains. The Assyrians transformed war into a science. They built armies with iron weapons, mastered siege warfare, and created the first professional military structure. Their kings, Tiglath-Pileser, Sargon II, Sennacherib, Ashurbanipal, stamped their authority across the Near East, from Egypt to Anatolia. Under Assyrian rule, Mesopotamia reached unprecedented geographic reach. And yet, this peak was edged with terror. The Assyrians ruled through fear as much as administration, crushing rebellions with ruthless force. They used deportation as a tool, moving entire populations to break local identities and create unified imperial subjects. But even in the shadow of brutality, knowledge thrived. Ashurbanipal, last great king of Assyria, built a library in Nineveh that collected tablets from across the ancient world. Thousands of works, histories, medical texts, hymns, mathematics, omens, and epics were gathered in stone rooms lit by oil lamps. It was here that the Epic of Gilgamesh was rediscovered centuries later. Through conflict, culture was preserved. In clay, civilization found a way to survive its own turmoil, yet empires built on force are fragile. The Assyrian machine, stretched across vast lands, eventually collapsed under the weight of constant warfare. When Nineveh fell in 612 BCE, it marked the end of an era. From the ruins rose the Neo-Babylonian Empire, led by kings who understood both ambition and legacy. Among them, Nebuchadnezzar II stands as a symbol of power and beauty. Under his rule, Babylon achieved its legendary splendor. He expanded the city, fortified its walls, and revived its religious rites. Ancient texts speak of the Hanging Gardens, a marvel of engineering, a mountain of green rising in the desert. Whether myth or memory, the gardens reflect the heart of Mesopotamian greatness, the belief that humans could shape nature into art. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon glittered under the sun, its gates adorned with blue-glazed bricks depicting lions and dragons. The Ishtar Gate, dedicated to the goddess of love and war, stood as the ceremonial entrance to the city. Processions marched through its arches during festivals, carrying statues of gods, playing music that echoed through wide streets. On balconies high above, nobles watched the spectacle as incense drifted through the air. This was the peak, when Mesopotamia shone brightest. But challenges pressed at its borders. Persia, rising in the east under Cyrus the Great, offered a new vision of empire, one built not only on conquest, but on tolerance and administration. When Cyrus entered Babylon in 539 BCE, he did so peacefully, promising respect for local traditions. Mesopotamia, the mother of civilization, became part of a larger world, a chapter in a growing story of humanity's evolution. As you settle deeper into rest, feel the weight and wonder of this rise and struggle. The peak of Mesopotamia was not perfect, no civilization is. It was brilliant, flawed, ambitious, fragile, innovative, and vulnerable. It lived at the edge of abundance and exhaustion, constantly balancing greatness with hardship. Its challenges were not signs of failure, but signs of growth. Through every difficulty, Mesopotamians adapted, learned, rebuilt, and remembered. Their legacy survived because they recorded it, pressed into clay, buried in libraries, hidden in ruins waiting to be found. The peak of Mesopotamia is the dawn of everything we call civilization today. Though its ziggurats crumble and its streets are silent dust, its ideas remain alive. In every system of law, every map of stars, every mathematical equation, every written story, we hear echoes of the ancient voices that once rose along the riverbanks beneath a glowing desert sky. When the golden age of Mesopotamia faded into the quiet glow of memory, the world did not darken. Instead, it expanded, carrying with it the ideas born beside the Tigris and Euphrates like seeds caught in the winds of time. The ancient walls of Babylon would crumble, the ziggurats would erode beneath sun and sand, and the clay tablets, once soft and impressionable beneath a scribe's reed, would lie buried beneath centuries of silence. Empires rose where Mesopotamia once stood, each leaving its own mark upon history, yet beneath their foundations, woven into their systems, whispered in their stories, lay the legacy of the world's first great civilization. The aftermath of Mesopotamia was not an ending, it was a beginning. The riverbanks where humanity learned to organize itself became the hidden roots of the societies we live in today. After Babylon fell to the Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great, Mesopotamia entered a new era, not of isolation, but of integration. Persian kings respected the deep spiritual and legal traditions of the land, understanding that true power lay not in suppression, but in harmony with what already existed. Roads stretched across the empire, connecting cities that once seemed impossibly distant. Trade flourished, temples operated, and administrators continued to carve tablets, adapting Mesopotamian cuneiform to Persian governance. The heart of civilization, now shared with others, beat in rhythm with a larger world. The ideas of law, administration, astronomy, and writing that began in Sumer were carried east toward India, west toward Greece, north toward Anatolia, and south toward Egypt. Let your imagination drift into this tapestry of influence. The Greeks, curious and hungry for knowledge, encountered Mesopotamian ideas through trade, conquest, and scholarship. They inherited astronomical data collected by generations of priests who charted the movements of Jupiter, Venus, and the Moon. This knowledge helped shape Greek science, which in turn shaped Roman science, which ultimately shaped the world we recognize today. The Babylonians' base 60 number system, the reason we measure time in 60-second minutes and 60-minute hours, was not a trivial choice. It was a mathematical structure born from their observations of cycles in the heavens. Every time you glance at a clock, you are touching a ghost of Mesopotamia. Law, too, traveled outward. Hammurabi's code, though ancient, introduced the radical concept that justice should be written, visible, and universal. It inspired legal traditions in the Near East, influenced later Persian decrees, and even resonated within the Mosaic laws of the Hebrew Bible. The principle that society should be governed by known rules rather than by the unpredictable will of rulers remains one of the most powerful ideas Mesopotamia gifted to humanity. It is this principle that shapes constitutions, courts, and rights today. Writing, one of the most profound inventions in human history, spread far beyond Mesopotamia. Cuneiform inspired other scripts, just as Sumerian myths inspired other mythologies. The story of the flood and the Epic of Gilgamesh, preserved on clay tablets in the library of Ashurbanipal, bears striking resemblance to the later tale of Noah. Concepts of heroism, mortality, divine justice, and the yearning for eternal life traveled across cultures like echoes in deep time. Literature, once preserved only in speech, became immortal through writing. Knowledge could now survive war, drought, and death. As you sink deeper into the quiet warmth of this story, imagine the layers of history that cover Mesopotamia like sediment in a riverbed. The Persians ruled peacefully, followed by the campaigns of Alexander the Great, whose armies marched through Babylon but chose to honor its traditions rather than erase them. Later came the Seleucids and the Parthians, blending Greek and Persian influences into the culture of the region. The Romans and Byzantines followed, claiming fragments of Mesopotamia as part of their vast empires. Then came the rise of Arab and Islamic civilizations, which looked upon Mesopotamian ruins not as forgotten relics, but as sources of wisdom. Scholars in Baghdad would later translate Mesopotamian astronomical texts into Arabic, preserving knowledge that might otherwise have disappeared. The legacy of Mesopotamia did not survive through monuments, it survived through ideas. Clay crumbles. Stone melts. But thought passes from mind to mind across the borders of time. When Islamic scholars laid the foundations of modern algebra, they built upon numerical concepts first explored in Sumerian fields. When medieval astronomers charted the sky, they did so with calculations refined by Babylonian priests. When philosophers debated the nature of justice, they echoed principles carved into stone 4,000 years earlier. The aftermath of Mesopotamia was, in truth, a diffusion, a spreading of culture like ripples on water, expanding outward long after the stone that caused them had vanished. The rivers that once nourished humanity's first cities still flow today, winding through modern lands that bear new names. Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, each contains fragments of the ancient world. Under farmland and cities, beneath highways and homes, thousands of tablets sleep in the soil, waiting for discovery. Each time archaeologists lift a tablet from the earth, brush away the dust of centuries, and read the marks of a long-dead scribe, they awaken a voice that believed it was speaking to the future. And indeed, it was. Yet what is most profound is not the scale of monuments or the brilliance of invention, it is the humanity that shines through the tablets. Business agreements written with care. Love poems composed with trembling hands. Prayers carved in desperation during drought. Dreams of immortality. Fear of the unknown. Pride in achievement. Doubt in fate. In these records, we discover that the people of Mesopotamia were not mythic beings, they were us, separated only by time. Their struggles and aspirations, their hopes and griefs, mirror our own. The distance between then and now dissolves when we realize that civilization is a continuous story, written by countless hands, each generation shaping the next. As you lie in the quiet dark, let this thought ease your mind: everything around you, your language, your stories, your laws, your calendars, your tools, carries a trace of Mesopotamia. We are heirs to their imagination, inheritors of their experiments with nature, time, and human society. When you walk into a library, you step into a dream that began with clay tablets. When you look at the night sky and trace the pattern of stars with your eyes, you follow the same maps drawn by priests who stood on ziggurat rooftops 4,000 years ago. When you consider justice, governance, or the meaning of life, you join a conversation that started in those first cities built from mud bricks and hope. The aftermath of Mesopotamia is not an echo fading into silence, it is a pulse. A heartbeat that travels through history, changing form yet constant in rhythm. It reminds us that progress is not linear, that civilizations rise and fall, but knowledge endures. Ideas, once recorded, can outlive empires. Now, as sleep draws closer, imagine the rivers again. The stars reflected in water. The distant murmur of markets long gone. The sound of reeds rustling on the banks where ancient children once played. The glow of lamps in temple courtyards. The echo of a hammer shaping brick. The scratch of a reed stylus shaping symbols of meaning into clay. These fragments of memory form the foundation of everything built afterward. Mesopotamia may be quiet now, its ruins half buried beneath windblown sand, but its legacy is awake in the world it helped to create. As the night wraps gently around your thoughts, drift with the knowledge that you are part of a story older than any city, older than any kingdom. You carry inside you the legacy of those who gazed at the same stars, walked the same earth, dreamed the same dreams. The cradle of civilization still holds us in ways we rarely notice. Its rivers still flow in our systems. Its light shines in our minds. And its spirit, restless, inventive, hopeful, remains alive in every human heart. Sleep now, surrounded by the ancient whispers of Mesopotamia's legacy, an epic journey without end.